and we will have an editor. So if shit goes haywire, I'll just say, editor, take that out, and then we'll start over from wherever.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Listening to podcast is no replacement for real training. While we attempt to provide accurate commentary, we hold no responsibility on how you use the information we provide. Get medical training. In the blink of an eye, everyday order can be replaced with once-in-a-lifetime chaos. Be prepared. This is the Civilian Medical Podcast.
So thank you guys for listening. This is episode 1. My name is Dietrich, better known as Skinny Medic on YouTube. My co-host, not so Skinny Medic. This is Sean from We Like Shooting.
Okay, I can see how this is gonna go. It's already starting, but hey, I'm okay with that. It's true. I'm not so skinny guy.
Not so Skinny Medic. But I think it's fine. We're good to go though. So
Exactly. I think it's good. We're like Gilligan and the Skipper, right?
yeah, we all can't be skinny, good looking, things like that. So
Okay, that'll do. Hey man, let's jump right in. Our goal on the show: talk about products, experiences, medical skills, just so people honestly can be prepared for the worst day of their lives. It is not a replacement for medical training. This is we'll just say that it's like an add-on, and we're going to teach skills in this, but there's no replacement for being in a room and having someone show you how to do it and getting your hands on it and being able to do it yourself, right?
absolutely. I think this is going to be a good foundation to at least have somebody have a general idea of what's going on. And then when they go take a class, get some hands-on training, they have a little bit better understanding, puts them a little bit ahead in class.
I totally 100% agree. So I think one of the first things we wanted to kind of start out with was, civilian involvement in kind of traumatic situations. I do want to say real quick, we're not attorneys, so don't take this as legal advice. We're going to talk about the issues kind of as we see them. And Dietrich, why don't you start out with Good Samaritan laws?
Yeah, so we don't have any money, so don't sue us either. So we can't really work out well for that. So, and we're seeing this, across the world right now, is that civilians are the ones who are making a difference in saving lives. That EMS is generally staging on these bad calls for the most part. Even if they're coming to your house just for an oh my gosh, an emergency, then they're still 12 and a half minutes out. It takes some time to get there. So these civilian responders are who are going to save lives. So I think that's what we're going to focus on and kind of work from there. While EMS is coming or EMS is staging or law enforcement is coming, then you're able to take care of your own and take care of yourself and your family and friends and stuff. So like you said, let's get started with the Good Samaritan laws. And I think this is what scares a lot of people, is the fact that they're scared that if I touch somebody, if I do something wrong, then I'm going to get sued. And that's not the case. As far as I'm aware, is every state inside the United States has some sort of law, whether it's named Good Samaritan or it's named something else, about able to help protect that civilian. So if you're on the side of the road and this guy has a major bleed, you're like, man, that looks like a lot of blood. I heard on the podcast I should probably put a tourniquet on that. And you put a tourniquet on it and the guy has paralysis to his arm. Well, you're still covered. You're doing reasonable patient care. If you go out and you're starting IVs, you're sticking needles in people's chests, you're going to open yourself up to liability. But if you're doing reasonable patient care, then you're covered. If you're doing CPR at a restaurant because someone is choking, then it doesn't have a favorable outcome, that patient still dies, then the family can't touch you. You were doing reasonable care.
Yeah, Good Samaritan laws exist so that people don't hesitate to help. There's a whole episode of Seinfeld kind of where they go to jail for not helping, stuff like that. And this is the opposite. It's to protect, just everyday average people if they decide to get involved. And if you go to court or something, they apply reasonable man. Would a reasonable man or woman with your level of experience in this exact situation do the same thing that you did? And as long as you're not doing things that are outside the level of your training, and this podcast unfortunately doesn't count as that training, I would probably say, you'll probably be safe. Real quick, I do want to talk about negligence. If something were to happen and you were to end up in civil or criminal court because of putting your hands on somebody, really they're going to try to prove negligence. And as far as I can tell, Now, I've talked to some attorneys and they say there's a bunch of intricacies in this, but let's just kind of basically lay out there's three things that they need to do to prove negligence. And that's duty of care. So are you familiar with the three parts of negligence?
Yes.
So what is duty of care?
So duty of care means that you had a responsibility to respond. For me, like if working EMS, I have if someone calls me, I have the duty to respond. If I'm on a specialty team doing search and rescue and I get a page out, then I have to respond. I can't just say, you know what, I'm going to finish eating my dinner. I'm on the ambulance, and I can't, we're just going to stay here. I'm going to finish my Big Mac before I get up and go and respond to this call.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, and like a caretaker relationship, if you're taking care of an older parent and they're in some kind of medical distress and you don't help them, then that would be duty of care and probably negligent. A child that you were in charge of, stuff like that. So there's a lot of different, duty of care, how that
Mhm.
can actually be. The next up is going to be standard of care not met. What's that?
So that kind of goes back to what is being standardized and taught through, whether it be Stop the Bleed classes or American Heart or first aid classes. What is the standard of care for, say, if I show you a patient, what 12 paramedics would do? Like, this is how I would treat that patient. Like, I'm going to give aspirin and nitro to that chest pain patient. If I have a patient who has a gunshot wound, I'm going to put a chest seal on them. Like, that's standard of care. If you go out and you start giving some other medication for chest pain, or this guy, is you're just making up stuff for a chest seal and doesn't really work, then people start scratching their heads going, I don't really think you're supposed to do that. That's where I think standard of care kind of comes into effect.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you've watched a YouTube video about needle thoracostomies and suddenly you're trying to do a decompression and you stab them in the heart, that standard of care would not be met. That's not reasonable, man. That's not what a reasonable person with your level of training would do in that situation. It's just outside the scope of your skill level and doing something incorrectly, doing something that you shouldn't be doing. It's all that kind of stuff kind of goes into that as well.
Right. And for us healthcare professionals, we generally have a standard of care guidelines. We have standing orders that we go by. So if we come out with that chest pain patient, this is what we do. Step 1, step 2, step 3. If you have someone who has a fracture, it's probably reasonable that you should give them some pain medicine, whether it be fentanyl, morphine, stuff like that. So, thinking about the civilian side of it, you've taken a Stop the Bleed class and you were taught, hey, if I had a tourniquet, I'm going to use it. If I don't, I'm going to start using gauze. Well, that's still standard of care. For a wound injury is apply gauze to it. If you don't have gauze, apply a t-shirt. You can still justify that being standard of care.
Yeah, totally, 100%. The third leg of that negligence claim is causation. Let's talk about that.
How about you talk about it first?
Okay, editor, cut that part out. Now, what causation is did you cause the injury? And this is another part that's a little bit gray, especially for civilians. Let's say that we'll go straight to self-defense because this is what everyone wants to know. First off, Good Samaritan laws, you're not required ever to put yourself in danger for any reason. So if there's like an active shooter or something and you're hidden in place, but you can see someone bleeding out and you decide not to go out there because you feel like it would be putting yourself in danger of death or serious bodily harm, I don't think there's a court in the world that's going to criticize you for that. So that causation, what if someone breaks into your house and you feel like they are going to harm you, to cause death or serious bodily harm, and you shoot them? Well, at that point you have caused that injury, but are you actually required, or would you be negligent if you don't decide to treat them or help them? The answer is no. I do not believe that, because you could easily make a case that by going over there and putting myself within arm's reach, I put myself in danger of death or serious bodily harm. So that kind of causation is very interesting. What if you're at a grocery store and you run into somebody with your cart and fracture their leg or something and then just walk off? Well, you caused that injury, whether it was on accident or on purpose, doesn't necessarily matter. And if you just walk off and don't assist them, then you might be found negligent. Anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think about like the fractures and stuff, that if you see an accident and there's a bone sticking out of the guy's leg and you pull on it and try to, make that bone go back inside the body. You're not trained to do that. You're not an orthopedist. That could be causing some problems. You can cause further harm by trying to reset that patient's leg or reset that patient's shoulder, when standard of care would be, let's put a splint on it and let's manage it that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's talk a little bit about consent in this incredibly politically correct environment that we live in these days. I've heard a few stories, and you probably have some better insight into this than I do. But let's talk about consent, like CPR on a woman, and just things like that. How do you teach in your civilian classes to get consent for treatment?
This is this is definitely a tough subject because I always introduce myself when I'm talking to someone, like, hey, my name's Dietrich, I'm a paramedic, can I take care of you, can I do this? If the patient is awake and verbal and is knows what day of the week it is, knows their name, knows who the president, all they're alert and oriented, then I ask them for consent, verbal consent. Can I take care of you, can I take a look at your injury, can I do this? So they can give me that consent. And if they're alert and oriented, they can say, no, screw off and don't touch me. I'm like, okay, I'll stand here while you bleed out, or I'll stand here while you have chest pain, whatever. So they have that verbal consent. It's when someone's unconscious, that's where the implied consent comes in, that if, or even a child, there's some things there with a child too, that, if my child gets hurt and I'm not there to answer for my child, then it would be implied that I'd want you to take care of my kid, put an ice pack on there, do the best you can for my kid while I'm not there. But also, for, implied consent, if someone's unconscious at the restaurant, you would assume they want you to take care of them. So you can go ahead and start doing patient care and stuff like that. And then, if they wake up and they're alert and they say, hey, don't touch me anymore, then we don't touch them anymore. But that they can, anytime consent or not consent to being treated. But that's why I always just introduce myself. I'm like, hey, my name's Dietrich. How can I take care of you? Can I take a look at your arm? Can I take a look at your shoulder? And let's go from there.
Yeah. Now, as actually a first responder, what if someone's just pretty blatantly doesn't want you touching them, doesn't want anything? Do you have any responsibility there?
There is some responsibility. If like we try to get as a professional first responder, we get law enforcement involved. Typically, they have a gun and a badge. They're a little more persuasive than we are, and try to take care of them. But ultimately, if someone is injured or sick and they don't want me to take care of them, then they can sign a waiver. It releases me from medical liability, saying that, hey, if I leave here and you die, you can't sue me. If you wake up dead, that's not my problem. But in 30 seconds from now, if you want to call me back, you can call me back. So civilians don't really have that option. But there again, if you're on the side of the road and someone says, I'm fine, don't touch me, but they look really bad, then don't touch them. Just stand back and kind of protect them. Don't let them hurt themselves. It gets a little confusing, like when the patient's confused, obviously, that they're not able to make decisions on their own. So now we have to step in and make decisions for them. So that gets a little touchy, but we still have to do what is best for the patient. And I think that's ultimately what, if you are in your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to do what's best for this patient, then you're covered. Like you're fine.
Yeah, I agree. We always have it in classes every single time. Well, what if they're combative, and what if they have an altered mental status? And just real quick, altered mental status is really kind of any kind of, well, exactly what I said, altered mental status. It could be caused by narcotics and alcohol. It could be caused by shock, hypothermia. Like there's so many traumatic brain injury. All these different things can cause an altered mental status. I'll tell a little story real quick about altered mental status that I had experience with. So I'm driving down the road one day and I see this car coming in from the opposite direction towards me. And I suddenly kind of see it veering into my lane. So I swerve hard right, and it swerves back into its own lane and crashes into a bridge, and then just starts to drift slowly across the street. I look at my rearview mirror and I see a guy rolling across the street with a pillow right after. And my initial thought is, oh man, that guy was walking on the bridge and that car nailed him. So I quick flip a U-turn, go up and park in the bank parking lot and start walking down to the car. The car has actually come to a rest up against an electrical box on the side of the road. And I'm getting closer, trying to figure out what is going on. Is there someone in there? Like, really, really cautious about what my possible threats could be. The guy has now gotten up out of the middle of the street and is walking towards a vehicle as well. So I think this is going to be a conflict, and I'm really, really iffy on whether I'm going to get involved or not. But I'm definitely very curious, and I want to make sure that no one needs help. So He's walking up. He's got this pillow under his arm. The pillow, completely unimportant to the story. It was just a weird detail that I remember. And as he's walking up, I see that there's nobody in the vehicle. All the windows are up. All the doors are closed. As he gets closer, I can tell that he is absolutely altered mental status, and he does have a laceration on his arm that's dripping blood into the street. He walks up. I was like, "What happened?" He's like, "I don't even know." I said, "Well, where's the driver?" And he said, "What?" And I said, "Is this your car?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How'd you get outside?" He's like, I don't know." He was either drunk or, I mean, diabetic, like there's low blood sugar, like all these things could be. I don't really know what it was. At that point, I didn't feel like he was a huge threat to me. I was, basing that off of his stature and the fact that I didn't see any visible weapons, and that he wasn't being rude or mean or anything. He was just very concerned that he wanted to call AAA and get out of there. Uh, so I decide at that point I'm going to treat. I put my gloves on. I scan his waistband just to make sure that he didn't have any guns or knives that I could see, because I was seriously concerned. And I put pressure on it, and I just put some gauze on it and pressure wrap it. And then I hear sirens, so I know for a fact that someone of equal or higher care is going to be there soon, and I can take off and do my own thing. Uh, so it was just one of those interesting things. He absolutely had an altered mental status, but I did my best to figure out what the threats were, what the risks were, and then I decided to put my hands on him. Now, you know this better than anybody, that once you start rendering first aid, you're pretty much stuck there until someone of equal or higher experience level gets there, right?
Exactly. Great point. If you are going to make a decision that you're going to get involved, you're stuck. You're going to get to hang out for a while until, like you said, someone equal or greater healthcare training arrives, and you're going to give them a report too. Like, hey, this is what I did. This is what I've done. This is what I saw. And you kind of give them a report as you hand over the patient. I've put gauze on this. The gauze has been on for a few minutes. We've got bleeding controlled now. He, maybe intoxicated or something going. Like, I would give them a good verbal report to kind of give them a foundation to start from. They may ask some of the same questions you've already asked him, but at least it gives them some idea. And one of the things you talked about was weapons, and that's one of the things I hit in my classes is if someone's altered, they get disarmed. Let's make this a fair fight. Like, I like to fight just as anybody else, but let's make it fair. Someone's a diabetic, the old man at church, who's got a little Smith & Wesson snubbed over revolver. Like, if his sugar's low, I don't want him like pulling that revolver on me thinking he's back in war. So we always, just like you said, scan the waistband, just double check, and we'll give their toys back to them when we're done playing. But for right now, let's make it a fair fight if we do decide they get a little grumpy.
Yeah, 100%. So I told that story to talk about altered mental status, to kind of get back to if they're confused or have that, and we decide to get involved, how do we get consent? You mentioned it already, that it's kind of, it's really that gray area. It's really tough to actually figure that out. But as long as I don't feel like they're a danger to me or people around me, there is a little bit of implied consent for that altered mental status. And again, I'm not an attorney. I'm just going by, what I know, my experiences, what I've been taught, and kind of what I've figured out for myself with a little bit of critical thinking. I mentioned earlier that every single class, someone's like, well, if they're altered mental status and they're being combative, I'll just knock them out. I'm like, well, as a civilian, that would be a bit of causation. You could be found guilty of assault and battery, holding someone against their will. How about kidnapping? Should we add that to the charge list? So personally, I say that's never a good idea. We have to do our best. We have to make these decisions in the blink of an eye. And what do you say when people ask that?
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said before about doing what's best for the patient. Like, if I would rather stand in the court and go, you know what? Yeah, I restrained that guy. I kind of held him back from getting in the roadway, because I didn't want him to get run over by a car. And I did I did restrain him so he wouldn't walk away or stumble into traffic. I'd rather have that conversation than have a conversation with an attorney that says, hey, you pulled up, you saw, you told the officer that you thought this guy was drunk or his blood sugar was low, but you let him stumble into traffic and he died. And now his wife is, a widow. His two daughters don't have a father anymore. Like, I would rather have the first conversation than have the second conversation.
Yeah, without question. So a big group of people's around a traumatic incident happens. There's a thing called the bystander effect, and I know you actually talked about this quite a bit and did a bunch of research on it. So why don't you kind of lay down for us what you think about it?
Yeah, so there's some talk about the bystander effect, and it comes from a incident that happened up in New York City a while back, and it's kind of an older story. But the fact that this psychologist is saying that there's a bystander effect, that we don't want to get involved. We're like, this is not my business, not my problem. Someone else will call 911. Someone else will start rendering aid. Someone else is going to do this. I'm gonna get on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
And we see it, like it's there. That's how we get our after action reports. Like, these people are just filming these incidents, and I've had it in my own career that there'll be someone is dying or in serious need of medical care, and there are people taking pictures, they're recording, and nobody wants to get involved. But at the same time, we've also seen incidents such as Vegas or the mall shootings, where there are civilians who step up and say, you know what, I'm going to make a difference. This is something bigger than me, and I'm going to step up. And I think that's because typically they've had some kind of training, whether it be military or whatever kind of training they've had, but they step up and they go, all right, we're going to start using fences to transport people. We're going to shut this down. We're going to do this. I'm going to make tourniquets like the Boston, city bombing, marathon bombing. Start
Mhm.
making some tourniquets. We're going to take charge. So I would encourage our listeners to be that person that steps up and says, you know what? I'm in charge. This is what's going to go down. We're going to do this. We're going to start putting tourniquets on that. We're going to hold pressure there. We're going to turn that patient into the recovery position. We're going to start moving patients closer to the door, because I know EMS is still a freaking long way away. Let's start moving patients to the door. So I feel like that we are still like that herd mentality. Like, we're like, all right, I walk towards the door. Just someone tells me to do something, I'm going to do it. So with that herd mentality, if someone else will step up and say, I need you to do this. And if you are going to take that lead, make it simple instructions. Don't tell them, I need you to do this, this, and this, and this. No, like, they will forget. Like, I need you to hold pressure right here. I will be back in 5 minutes, and kind of give someone clear direction. So if someone does step up and takes that leadership role, other people will fall and take suit of that. They will say, oh, this guy seems to know what he's doing. I'm gonna help. This lady seems she's taking charge. Like, she seems to have her shit together. Like, we're gonna do this. So that's following them, and kind of giving. Don't let the bystander effect just take advantage of you. You were just standing around looking at these patients when you could step up and be the person in charge and start guiding people in what to do. You don't have to do all the work yourself. Like, if you have people who are there, that are screaming and they're in shock or whatever, if you give them simple commands, then that they will do it. You just have to be the one that takes charge and says, we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I always play Boston Marathon because it's such a great example of all the different kind of archetypes in society. I talk about the hands-on head people that are just so overwhelmed with what's going on. They're hands-on head. They have no idea what to do. They're frozen, and the physiological responses to a traumatic incident: fight, flight, freeze, posture, and submit. They're really in effect, especially in some of the video from the Boston Marathon bombing. So we got hands on head. We've got the videographers recording it for YouTube. We've got people, the civilians, and in the video that I show in my class, there's no first responders really doing anything. They're actually trying to figure out are there secondary and tertiary threats. They're reporting in and trying to get stuff in. There was just cops there in the video that I show. No real paramedics or medics or EMTs or anything. And then there's just people who are trying to do something. They may not have any medical knowledge, but they're down there with their hands, dirty, bloody, whatever it happens to be, putting themselves at risk to help someone else out. So I love to see all these different archetypes. But you called it, you said it. People sometimes, especially when they're stressed out, especially when they're in their fight and flight mode, they need a leader and they need someone to kind of instruct them on what to do. You nailed that.
They're in shock and awe. They're frozen. And you're like, I just need you to move. Like, I need you to take one step forward and start helping me here. And it needs that encouragement. And when we talk to, officers and stuff like that, I've never been shot. Hopefully I never get shot. That I'd probably cry like a little girl. But, you get shot, you're like, oh my gosh. And, we talk about, help with like walking officers through that, me being safe. Like, all right, I need you to use your tourniquet, pull it out, pull the tab over and like you're walking these people through because they're in shock. And like I probably be the same thing. I'm gonna be in the fetal position going, oh, my leg, that dude shot me in the leg. And I'm either gonna be crying like a little girl or pissed off. Like I don't really know how it's gonna go, but we need someone to step up and say, like, this is what's gonna happen. We're gonna take charge. Right or wrong, we're gonna do it. And there's been, not that I'm aware of, any lawsuits or anything like that saying, oh my gosh, this guy did tourniquets, this guy did this guy tore up our fencing to move patients out of the concert hall. Like none of that's happened.
Yeah, 100%. So don't be a bystander, I think, is the whole point of this. Now, Good Samaritan laws, they're different everywhere. Like in Colorado, our Good Samaritan laws are basically filled with ski patrol and other such nonsense that really doesn't affect anything anymore.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. One thing about, probably if you're listening to this, then you follow the Good Samaritan law. But if you are a healthcare provider, like you're a nurse, you're a physician, you're a paramedic, you're an EMT, these are out the window. Like the Good Samaritan law does not affect you. For me, like when I put a tourniquet on the side of the road, we'll talk about that earlier. That's, I was a paramedic. Like I'm not a civilian. I'm a paramedic, and if I do something wrong, then absolutely, that person could come after me. But as long as I'm doing, like you said, the standard of care, there wasn't negligence, I didn't cause any further harm, I did what was best for the patient, then that guy's going to shake my hand and we're going to move on.
Yeah, totally agree. So some Good Samaritan laws describe a legal requirement pretty much for just citizens to assist people in distress, unless doing so would put themselves in harm's way. Now, citizens are often required to, at a very minimum, call 911. It's not even a requirement in all places, but a lot of people do actually call it out in their Good Samaritan laws specifically.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People get frustrated too because they call 911 and then the dispatcher is asking you 1,000 questions, and people seem to get frustrated with that. And I get it. You're at this big event, or it's just a wreck on the interstate, and you're like, all right, we've got a wreck here. I need EMS, and then the dispatcher starts asking you, how many patients? Is there entrapment? Is there fire? Is there liquid coming out? And you're like, just send EMS. Well, they are like they are sending, but now we're talking about resources. Like, do I need the fire department to do extrication to bring the jaws of life out? Is there a fire that I need them to put water on it? Is there someone actively fighting at the scene that wants to punch everybody else in the face? Like that's stuff that needs to know so we can get better resources and more resources to the scene.
Definitely. All right. Anything else on this topic of Good Samaritan laws?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think we pretty much covered it. Next up, we kind of want to do an introduction to March. March is basically an algorithm that has the types of physiological responses to traumatic injury in the order in which they will kill you the fastest. So March stands for massive hemorrhage or bleeding, airway, respiration, circulation, and last but not least, hypothermia and head injury. And there's also kind of a new school that goes on to this as well, where there is an E at the end of that. And what does that stand for?
Evacuation. So it means once we've done the March algorithm, let's evac them. Let's start moving them off the scene.
Yep, absolutely 100%. So we're going to go through all these phases of care kind of in detail, but I want you to start memorizing this right now. Massive hemorrhage, airway, respiration, circulation, and hypothermia and head injury, followed up by that evacuation. So March E is what we want you to remember. We're going to drill down. And I'll tell you this, it's funny in classes when we start doing scenarios and things like that, how many people forget how to spell March or what it stands for, right?
Exactly. And, for years we taught ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. And so everyone still has that in their head. And I get it. It's super easy to memorize. Like, all right, ABC, I got that down. But now we've flip-flopped that. Like, all right, we want to take care of bleeding first. So now we're looking at circulation, then airway and breathing. Like this is messing with my brain. So it is like it's something you have to concentrate and figure out, all right, massive bleeding. You can, if you get a femoral artery that's been severed, you can bleed out your entire blood volume in about 3 minutes. And you lose half your blood volume in about 1.5 minutes. So with that half of your blood volume gone, you are getting confused. Maybe you're passing out. You're not able to make cognitive decisions. So it happens super quick. But you can go 6-8 minutes, maybe longer, without breathing. So that's kind of why we've reprioritized. We're like, all right, let's keep the red stuff on the inside because we can die faster from that. and then we'll fix airway and breathing. And we've seen this in several cases that let's get the red stuff inside the container, and then we'll fix airway and breathing, because I don't carry red blood cells in my car, packed red blood cells. I don't carry that stuff, so we need to keep that stuff inside.
100%. Let's talk just a little bit about the history of March and kind of how it came about. First off, March was pretty much introduced with by the TCCC protocols, and this is something put together by many learned doctors and combat medics and PJs and corpsmen that came back, and they formed this committee of TCCC, or the Committee for TCCC. TCCC stands for Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and it was generally based on the military. Our case fatality rate, I think, in previous conflicts before the global war on terror was something like 14%. 14% of the people who were injured on the battlefield, and I think that's the number. It's 12 to 14% actually died from their injuries. So they were constantly going back and trying to figure out, what are the survivable events and kind of what is actually killing our warfighters. And they came up with the March protocol because massive hemorrhage was killing people before any of the other things.
This is something that's fairly new too. Like, in the big scheme of things, like, this is a fairly new concept. I've got guys that are prior military that haven't been out that long, that were not issued a tourniquet. They weren't issued a CAD or soft T. They were they had the old school, like, bandana and windlass. Like, that's how they were taught. So even think back as recent as, like, the movie Black Hawk Down, with that incident, that's kind of like seemed to be, for me, like, that was the big turning point you see in the trauma care, because those guys came back and were like, this is not working. Like, this guy died because we were trying to use Miguel forceps, trying to clamp off his femoral artery, when there's got to be something better. And so you've seen the CAT tourniquet start picking up ground there. That maybe this guy in Black Hawk Down, if they would apply a tourniquet, maybe he survives. We'll never know, but maybe that does happen. So you started seeing them, like, the patient care trauma side, come a long way from these wars. And that's one positive side, that war medicine is coming here to the streets, and now we can see it make a difference in patient outcomes.
Yeah, totally agree. So TCCC, or before TCCC in prior conflicts, 12 to 14% case fatality rate. And then TCCC was kind of put into effect. And as a test, they wanted to see how it would work if they trained everybody. So with the 75th Ranger Regiment, they actually worked, and they taught everybody from the very bottom, lowest ranked individuals, all the way up through the officers. And everyone was trained in TCCC. And what happened after they did that is their case fatality rate went down to 2 to 3%. So that's huge improvement. So we can see that TCCC is founded on a lot of institutional and empirical knowledge, and the committee meets every single year to look at the things that they're doing, the protocols that they're using, the products that they're using, and make changes and recommendations based on all of that data that they gather throughout the year.
They are solid dudes. I've had the opportunity to meet a couple of them. Personal friends with one of the guys on the committee, and they are solid dudes, and they're all humble. Like, that's the thing that gets me. Like, and I they've done some freaking badass stuff, but yeah, they're super humble about it. And, like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is so awesome. So from that, because it was very military based and stuff, the civilian world brought out the TECC, or the Tactical Emergency Casualty Care. And this was more aimed at first responder organizations like police and medics and things like that. But really very similar, also teaches the March protocol, and just aimed a little bit more at the civilian world and less at the military. Not civilians, to be sure, but the civilian world of first responders.
Correct.
Now, how do we know that this stuff works? Well, the 75th Ranger Regiment, we know that works. There was a report, the Krog Journal of Trauma 2008. It was a combat support hospital in Baghdad. They put everything together, and we'll talk about this in tourniquets, but they saw when they started using tourniquets, out of 232 patients with tourniquets on 309 limbs, that the CAT was the best field tourniquet. There were no amputations caused by tourniquet use, and there were only approximately 3% of casualties that had transient nerve palsies after the fact caused by that tourniquet use. So, I mean, that's huge. And that's the kind of data that these committees for both TCCC and TECC look at every single year when they make their recommendations, when they update their protocols and do other stuff. So this stuff works, and that's why we want to talk about it.
Absolutely. I mean, they've got plenty of research and data, numbers to show you. It was funny. I met with the guys at NAR with the cat tourniquet, and I was looking for research and data, and literally within seconds, I had just notebooks and piles of just data on top of me. And it was just thick notebooks of research papers and cases, and I was like, "Holy crap! Like this is a lot." So, it's a big deal when they come out and say, the cat, the soft T are the two that we recommend. Like I hope, it sounds like this year they're going to release some more tourniquets onto the market that that are already on the market. They're just going to approve them, recommend them. So I think that's exciting. But when they do it, like they put their stamp of approval behind it, that's a big deal.
It really is a big deal. Um, let's move into, so again, we're gonna dive much deeper into March E and talk about that. But let's talk about phases of care, and we're just going to give a brief overview of this, and then we're going to also dig down into this in further episodes. So phases of care are generally kind of what you do, and when you do it. In TCCC, there's three phases of care. There's care under fire, there's tactical field care, and there's tactical evacuation care. Very militaristic and kind of focused towards the military because that's what TCCC is. With TECC, they looked at that and they were like, well, let's get something that's a little bit more civilian based. And they go direct threat, indirect threat, and evacuation. And that's kind of the ones that I teach. How about you, Skinny?
Yeah, I honestly, like, I bounce around. Like, I guess I'm not as skilled as you are, I guess, but like I bounce around. I swear, like I'm like all over the place on it. I'm like, all right, we're care under fire, tactical field. Like I'm not as disciplined as that. It's like I bounce around, but we do try to focus and say, look, if the bad guy is still shooting, like let's shoot the bad guy in the face. Like that's probably, there's one thing we put a tourniquet on and we shoot the bad guy in the face. Other than that, like we can kind of digress, but you probably shouldn't be putting a band-aid on while there's guys still shooting at you.
Right. So when you break it down, really, both of them are identical. They just have a different nomenclature that is used. But under direct threat or care under fire, it's literally like there's an apparent threat, and you and the casualty and other people are basically under threat of death or serious bodily harm. So there's very few things that we do in that because of that. We'll talk about that and dig deeper in another one. So, direct threat is that there's a threat. There's a threat.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do? And what are our protocols here? Next up, we've got that tactical field care, or as we like to say, indirect threat. That
Mm-hmm.
means we've gained the advantage over the threat. There's less apparent threat. And that means that we can dive deeper into the actual medical treatment and taking care of the casualty.
Exactly. That's where that March algorithm comes into effect there. Like we're looking at, let's do a good assessment of this patient and find out what our injuries are, and let's take care of the life threats.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, evacuation. Get out of there, have a plan, do all that. We'll dig down and kind of talk about the fundamentals of that and kind of what we both recommend in that. But really, it doesn't matter which one it is. It doesn't matter if you say care under fire, tactical field care, tactical evacuation care, or direct threat, indirect threat, and evacuation. They're very synonymous in what they are. But I think just for me personally, when I'm teaching classes, I mean, I'm dealing with people that have trouble spelling March once their blood starts pumping. So I like direct, indirect, and evacuation personally.
Yeah, and it's funny, like you guys, if you've never done any kind of patient movement, you're gonna figure how out of shape you are pretty quick. And when you start dragging people and moving people around, and like you figure out, holy cow, like I need to do some cardio. Like this is kicking my butt, and that's interesting. It's fun to do.
Yep, totally. And now I want our listeners to take just a brief moment, press pause, and I want you to recite what March stands for. And you'll be surprised that you can't do it. So go ahead, press play again now, and let's get back into it. In this, we absolutely want to talk about products. We want to talk about new stuff on the market. We're going to go do deep dives into how to use products that exist out there. But the one that you wanted to talk about, what was it again?
So this is the Gen 4 soft tourniquet coming from TAC Med Solutions. So there again, it's one of those recommended tourniquets from the TCCC committee. It's all metal. It's aircraft aluminum tourniquet. So it has a windlass, which is what you probably need when you're looking at applying a tourniquet. A windlass tourniquet is probably the way to go. And so it has aircraft aluminum, and they've upgraded this time. One of the things that I've found struggle with it, a couple things, was the buckle. I think it really sucked trying to apply it to yourself because it wouldn't feed very well. And then two, once you got it secure, is trying to get the stupid thing into the triangle. So that was always my complaint when I was talking about it and dealing with them. And so, I mean, they didn't listen to me. They changed it on their own. It wasn't because Skinny Medics had changed it, but they've upgraded now. So now the buckle is a rounder, smoother shape. So now when you're pulling it across your arm for self-application, it's a lot easier. It flows really nice. It's still an 1.5-inch tourniquet, width tourniquet, but it closes, clamps down tight. Then when you turn the windlass to get the bleeding to stop, you have what they call a track. It's a retention clip that when you turn the windlass and it's locked down, you can put it into the retention clip and it holds your windlass in place while you get into the triangle. So it really does help. Like playing with it, it's a big help. So the windlass is still aluminum, but the triangle piece is plastic, because really the torsion and the pressure is all coming on the windlass as you're rotating it around, trying to get the bleeding to stop. But there's really not that much pressure on the distal end of the tourniquet. So the triangle itself and the clip can be plastic. It's what you need is that metal windlass. Is not, for them, it helps hold the pressure better.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that retaining clip, I mean, it's similar to a cat tourniquet. It's basically the same design. This one just happens to be metal, and it makes a lot of sense. You basically drop the windlass into that retaining clip and then put the triangle locking device over the windlass. And it's one of the things that I actually hated was, seriously, with limited dexterity, like, sit on your hand for a couple of minutes and then try to put a soft tee on. It's definitely, and I realized that I just said that I do the stranger with tourniquets, but I realized that, I mean, it's true. Like I try to figure out like which ones are easy to use. Now,
Are you left or right-handed?
I'm right-handed. I always find that the soft tee for me is really hard to put on one-handed on my arm.
Yeah, and that's what, like, for me, like, and on my tactical vest, I wear a cat on the outside, and inside my IFACT, my trauma kit on my vest, I keep a soft tee. For me, it's something happens, and I need to apply another tourniquet or like that. I want another option. I want another backup option. But I've always said, like, for me, like you said, like applying the cat one-handed is super easy.
Mhm.
If I have both hands free, the soft tee is just fine. But I do think this last generation is a nice upgrade for them.
Very cool. And those are available at medicalgearoutfitters.com, which, full disclosure, that's actually your website. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, so Medical Gear Outfitters is my small business. We started several years ago with $100 on the kitchen table and kind of this crazy idea to start a business and YouTube channel around it, and it has taken off. So now that is our business. We are officially a small business. We've got a couple employees that help us pack orders and stuff like that. So we have pre-made kits for you guys that I've designed or we've designed, and so that way it makes it easier for you. But also we have individual supplies. So if you're like, I want to build my own kit, then you can absolutely go in through there, click, and build your own kit how you'd like to see it built out.
Very cool. I love it. All the products we link to are going to be there at Medical Gear Outfitters, and we're going to link to them specifically. In fact, this podcast is brought to you by Medical Gear Outfitters. So definitely give them your support. The stuff that you buy there, you can trust. When you talk about Amazon and eBay and some of the deals that people can find, it's generally counterfeit stuff. And I do want to talk about that in a later episode, counterfeits and how to identify them. But
absolutely. That gets my blood pressure up.
I know. But Medical Gear Outfitters is definitely a place you can trust. And we hope that you'll definitely check that out. By the way, I did order a Gen 4 softie from Medical Gear Outfitters just about an hour ago, and I used coupon code Civilian Medical, which gave me a 10% discount, and it can give you one too. We are going to have another segment in the show called After Action, where we just kind of look at incidents. And I realize it's a podcast, so we'll have to paint a visual story with our voices. But we have a pretty interesting one this week. And honestly, it's pretty terrible. The video was kind of going all around and being talked about in a bunch of different groups. Why don't you lay it down for us?
Yeah, so it happened like first part of the week. I got tagged on Instagram, which I love when guys do that. I can on these videos, and then it disappeared. I was like, what the heck happened to this video? So for 2 days, I looked for it, couldn't find it. And then all of a sudden, like last night, it went nuts. People were sharing it, posting it. So I downloaded it so I could have a copy. And I started sharing it, and then it got taken down. But it was gruesome. Like I got some text messages. People were going crazy because they were apparently eating dinner, scrolling through Facebook, and they would see an arm flapping around like a fish. And it would get your attention. So I liked it. So what it is, it's a man and a woman. Apparently they were riding on a moped, motorcycle type thing. They get hit by a truck. So the main focus is on the man, and then there's a female patient involved too, but she's probably 15 feet away from, so she's a little bit further away, but they're both critically injured. The man has an injury to his arm that's partially amputated. It's not completely amputated, but it's a partial amputation. And he's like moving around. It's flapping like a fish. There's moderate blood around his arm. And then his tib fib, his lower part of his leg, it's sticking out. So it's an open fracture. And then his other ankle is kind of turned around the wrong way. So he's got a lot of problems going on. And then you can't really see the girl because they don't really focus on it very well, but she looks twisted up. Like it's almost like her body's twisted as well.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have any external bleeding. So they're both critical. They both are, need to get off the scene quickly. So you kind of have to make that decision of, all right, who am I going to treat first? What's, going back to that March algorithm like we talked about a few minutes ago, you see some bleeding, and we kind of talked about that earlier, that you don't see a lot of bleeding, but I think it's going to bleed.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's not bleeding a lot. Maybe there's 20, I don't know. I estimated like 20 to 40 cc's of blood on the ground. Not much, not life-threatening hemorrhaging or anything like that. But vasoconstriction is what I would be worried about.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we talked about. One of the teaching points, you have a lot going on in this scene. So for me, I think maybe I'm a little overzealous on the tourniquets, but I would put a tourniquet on it. So you don't have to worry about it anymore. Like you don't have to worry about, is this going to start to bleed? Is it going to have issues down the road 10 minutes from now? Let's just put a tourniquet on it so I can evaluate the rest of the scene and start doing more patient care instead of tying me down for 5-6 minutes while I'm trying to bandage this wound.
Yeah, tell us real quick, what is vasoconstriction?
So vasoconstriction is that the arteries and veins have gotten severed, and the body's like, holy crap, I want to stay alive. So they start to constrict. You get some muscle swellings around the site, and they will kind of retract a little bit, but they'll kind of pull back on themselves. The body is trying its best to stay alive. It realizes, holy crap, this is a bad situation. I'm going to stay alive. And so the first few minutes, everything constricts or swelling, but then the body relaxes because it's like, I'm tired, I can't do this anymore. Maybe the blood pressure starts to drop and they can't do this anymore. And so it starts opening up. And then that's when you get the bleeding coming out. And by this point, you're probably not going to see like that bright red blood spraying like we see in the movies because their pressure's low now. Like now their blood pressure, instead of being 120/80, is now 70/40. So there's no pressure behind it to make it spray. So you're busy doing something else. Maybe you, for this instance, you've kind of bandaged that arm. Now you're over here with a lady and you look over and now there is a large pool of blood around this guy and he's been bleeding out for the last few minutes while you were messing with someone else.
Yeah, it is. It's so like, this is a tough video for me to look at, like that open fracture of the arm and leg. Which do you think is the more critical injury based on what you saw?
So I still think the partial amputation is the critical injury here because you have blood loss, you have potential for a massive bleeding there. The other things are distracting injuries. Like there's hardly any blood coming out of the leg. That's open fracture. The ankle's kind of twisted around. I would be willing to bet he probably has a pelvis fracture, but there's nothing I can do about that at this point. Even the lady, like there's nothing I can do for her at this point. She needs a trauma surgeon. So she needs to be under a knife and scalpel, some cold steel, quicker. So, that's what I would, stop major life-threatening bleeding and let's try moving these patients closer to the hospital.
Yeah, totally agree. There is so much trauma involved in that. But again, it's what phase of care am I in? Am I under direct threat, indirect threat, or evacuation? Run through the March protocol, handle that massive hemorrhage. But in this one, there is not that initial massive hemorrhage, but you have to kind of assume, and I'm 100% with you. I would tourniquet that, and maybe even the leg. Like it's tough to tell on that one if there's any, big, huge blood vessel.
I would rather see that happen than me get there as the professional and go, holy crap, we should have put a tourniquet on this 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I would rather see someone say, hey, Dietrich, I put a tourniquet on this arm because it was amputated and this looked really nasty. So I went ahead and put a tourniquet on it too. And then let me evaluate it. If I take it off and I'm not going to like give you a hard time about it. And EMS, if they're even slightly educated, shouldn't give you a hard time about it, but maybe they leave it on, maybe they take it off. So let them evaluate it. We have that all the time with cops. Cops put on a tourniquet. Sometimes it was the right thing to do. Sometimes it was the wrong thing to do, but we don't give them crap for it. We're like, all right, appreciate your help. And I downgrade it and put a pressure bandage on it. So, there again, I would rather see someone put a tourniquet on something that didn't need it than all of a sudden we get there and this guy's lost 1,000 cc's of blood and you were just standing there. You didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, 100%. And then mechanism of injury is another thing that I was taking into consideration. So first off, you have to look around at the situation, figure out what your possible threats are, gain the advantage over those. And we will dig further down into that in further episodes. But I was worried about mechanism of injury. The mechanism of injury here is on a motorcycle, got hit by a truck. There's definitely mechanism of injury that could lead to spinal break, spinal fractures, C-spine, stuff like that. And so that was the first thing I looked at. They were both kind of moving their heads around. So at that point, I assume that they're probably don't have any C-spine injuries, or at least that's not the most important one. So yeah, from that point, once I figure out mechanism of injury and I don't think that there's C-spine stuff, that's when I kind of move into, okay, massive hemorrhage or possible massive hemorrhage. Let's get this figured out.
Another thing I thought about too with that one was that they're wearing like not a lot of clothes because it looks like it's summertime or it's warm weather where they're at. So the temperature of that asphalt, like, could it be causing some second-degree burns because now they're laying on asphalt that's 120, 130 degrees in the sun, or maybe even hotter than that, So if you said, spinal cord injuries definitely plays something to think about here. If I couldn't move them, then let's don't move them. But if they're getting burned because of the asphalt, then I would make a move with them. I would control the bleeding and slide them the best I can carefully to the grass or cool them off so we're not getting second degree, third degree burns from the asphalt. There's plenty of data to show that if you're going to get a spinal cord injury, it's going to happen the moment of impact. The moment they were ejected off of the motorcycle or moped or whatever and they landed to the ground, like that's when the spinal cord injury is going to happen, not when you go to move them to a safer location. Typically we try to tell people just to leave people in the car, leave them still, but if there's a danger to them, we got to move them. Like if the car's on fire, you probably shouldn't leave the patient inside the driver's seat. Let's jerk them out of the driver's seat, move them to the grass. So kind of using some common sense if we can there.
Yeah. It was definitely a tough one. Deglovings and that partial amputation, it was like almost degloved because it was, the bone was clear and sticking out, bright white bone. And like just the hand was just a floppy mess that was kind of hanging off the side, almost fully amputated.
It was great right around dinner time. It was a great post.
It was so funny because I was like, oh man, this is really good to talk about. So there was a lot of good discussions in like 2 or 3 groups that I was in, and then just suddenly it disappeared. It was gone.
Yes.
That's terrible. Anyway, all right, we'll be doing a lot of those after actions whenever we see them. So if you actually do see them, let us know about them. I know people already do it with Skinny Medic, so it's not going to be an issue. Every time one of these comes up, you get a ton of different messages about it.
Definitely. I love it. Like I love when people tag Skinny Medic on Facebook or Instagram going, hey man, take a look at this. Like I'd love to see an after action report. So we've done a few on the channel already, but definitely looking forward to talking about them and kind of painting that picture here on the podcast.
All right, man. I love it. I think that's going to do it for this episode number 1. So first off, where can people find everything that you do and buy medical gear and find your videos and all kinds of other stuff?
So 2 places. Skinnymedic.com is going to point you towards our social media stuff, like our YouTube channel, stuff like that. So we're on YouTube under Skinny Medic. We're on Instagram as well. And then if you're looking for supplies, we can go to medicalgearoutfitters.com.
All right. That sounds freaking fantastic. And I really appreciate it. And again, there is the civilian medical, all one word, no spaces, for 10% off at medicalgearoutfitters.com as well. My name is Sean Heron. I run the Firearms Radio Network, and We Like Shooting. If you're not familiar, it's a podcast. It's kind of like Howard Stern for the gun world. You can find more about my medical stuff at welikeshooting.com/medical. And even all the products that I talk about over there and have links to, it all goes back to Medical Gear Outfitters as well. So you can find this podcast on the Firearms Radio Network at firearmsradio.tv, or you can just go to civmedical.com. That's CIVmedical.com. I think this was a really fun first episode. I can't wait to do more.
Definitely. I'm super excited to see where this is going to go and what it's going to grow into.
Very cool. Don't forget to subscribe to this in iTunes, Google Podcasts, wherever fine podcasts are served. And we will talk to all of you next week.
Find us and subscribe at civmedical.com.